Hello everyone, I'm Prentis Rollins and welcome to lesson number 4 of my 10-part course on creating comics. Last time we examined the wonderful intricacies of perspective, and in today's lesson we're going to look at two things, light and shadow and rendering. There's a very real sense in which when you draw or paint, all you're ever really drawing or painting is light. Light is the reason we can see objects, and if we couldn't see them, we couldn't draw or paint them. So in order to draw them in a way that makes them look real, we have to have some basic understanding of how light behaves when it falls on things, and how different kinds of lighting effects create different kinds of moods and emotions. Rendering means all the different ways in which different kinds of things can be represented on paper by using different kinds of drawing techniques. As a comics artist, you have to have a toolbox of different ways of representing stone, sand, cloth, skin, grass, clouds, fur, hair, water, etc. These are all different things with different kinds of surfaces, and you're going to be using different techniques to draw them. So let's start with light and shadow. And there's two key ideas I'm going to want you to remember from this. The difference between direct and reflected light.
Okay, guys, so I'm working on my computer here for ease of this exercise, and you can see I'm wearing my handy glove, which keeps my hand from getting the tablet screen messy. All right, so I'm using my ruler tool in the computer. Okay. So this is it's a circle. That's all it is, a simple circle. Easiest thing in the world to draw. But what I want to do is I want to transform this circle into a sphere. So right now it's a circle. I want to turn it into a sphere. A sphere is a globe, and it has shape and form. And so how do we represent shape and form of a sphere on paper, on a flat surface? Well, we do it with light and shadow and rendering. Let me get started here. I want to have the light source above, so the light's going to be coming in from this direction, striking the sphere there. So what I'm doing is I'm going to I'm just going to do it. I'm going to blacken in this area. you can see I've left this area right here light. I've left it light because the light is striking from this direction. And now, and I'll talk about this area in just a minute. Now I'm going to start rendering. And the rendering technique I'm going to use is cross-hatching. I'm just putting thin lines and I'm crisscrossing them over one another, kind of slowly building them up. Very nice. I'm going to make my pen a little thinner. I just kind of keep crossing over the old lines with new ones, and I'm creating a gradient, a light transition from light to dark. Now I'm going to use some some white ink to kind of make this even softer and more lovely. Now this is pretty easy when I'm using the computer, doing this white ink effect. If I were doing this on paper, it would take a little bit longer because I'd have to be waiting for the black ink to dry before I could actually put white ink on it. This is one of the advantages of sometimes working with a tablet. But you can still get the idea of what I'm doing by watching me do it this way. Switching back to black ink. So as you can see, this is already looking much more like a real three-dimensional object, like a sphere or a ball. Baseball, a golf ball, basketball. And it sort of looks like it's being hit by a pretty strong light from above. But there's something else I can do to make this an even more convincing sphere. Let me show you. I'm going to create the illusion that this sphere is resting on a tabletop. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a shadow. That's the outline of it. Now I'm going to darken it in. Turn my drawing a little bit, just like that. I'm always turning my drawings, whether I'm working with paper and ink or the computer. Makes things easier to turn them. It's very easy with a computer. You can turn things any which way. So now it's looking much, much more convincing. And the addition of the shadow helps to reinforce the idea that the light is striking the sphere, the ball, from here, like that. And that's why this shadow is being cast on the tabletop or whatever. But we can make this even more interesting. Let me get rid of that. Oh, but before we move on, I told you before that I wanted to tell you the difference between direct and reflected light. This light, this part of the object of the ball that's lit up is being lit with direct light. Light is coming on the object from this direction and it's striking this surface directly. This light down here is reflected light. Light is coming from this way, it's creating a shadow, but some of it is bouncing back onto the ball and making this less brilliant light effect on the underside. And you can see the difference between direct light and reflected light all the time. If you start looking for it, like at your own face in the mirror, you can start to notice. Now I said that we can make this drawing a bit more interesting, so let's quickly do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this tabletop some texture. I'm imagining that this is a wooden tabletop, and so I'm just going to start putting in some wood grain. That's all I'm doing. So these little swirly things, if you look at wooden planks or furniture, you can sometimes see these sort of wood grain swirly patterns. So that's what I'm adding. Nothing fancy. Just these kind of repeating, lovely swirly shapes. And voila, we suddenly have a baseball maybe sitting on a wooden tabletop. I can even take my white ink, and if I want to get a little fancy, I can continue the wood pattern with white ink inside the shadow, which is makes it kind of visually interesting. Okay, so that's our ball exercise.
So that's a simple sphere. Again, to make it look real and authentic, we are constantly thinking about light and how to represent light falling on its surface. Through the magic of cross-hatching, which is a kind of rendering, we were able to transform a simple circle into a three-dimensional ball. Pretty cool. And easier than you think. Here we're seeing the whole thing sped up. Now, take a look at this. This is a page from a science fiction graphic novel of mine. This is just the basic line work without any lighting or effects added. I wanted this to be a representation of a futuristic city with some kind of spaceship whizzing by overhead. But I wanted this to look really cool and realistic. The first thing I did was to add a night sky with stars. It's just black ink with dots, tick, 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 made with white ink. After that, I just started adding big blobs of black ink on all the down planes of the objects and forms. The lighting is pretty standard, coming from directly overhead. Next, I started adding cross-hatching to the edges of the black masses to soften them up and create tonal gradations. Cross-hatching is a rendering technique I'll talk more about in a few minutes. Basically, it's a way of giving objects the illusion of shape. Finally, I used white ink to make the cross-hatching even softer and more subtle. I used a toothbrush dipped in ink to make the spatter effect at the bottom of the image. That's a rendering technique that you can use to create the illusion of mist. I'll talk about that more when we get to the lesson on inking. I hope that wasn't too hard to follow. The basic idea is we're using light to create the illusion of shape, form, and reality. Take a look at this. This is a drawing I did of a face. No lighting effects, just the basic line work. We're going to talk about drawing the face in the next lesson, by the way. Now, look what happens when we indicate light. This is pretty standard lighting from an overhead source. The character looks more real because with the addition of light, we're indicating form and shape. Here's the character lit from the side. The character seems to be in a space that's not so well lit, probably indoors. Now we're seeing the character lit from below. She suddenly seems downright sinister. And here's the character strongly backlit. She's ominous, dangerous, mysterious. You can get all sorts of interesting effects with light and rendering. Here's another character. Again, the character has pretty straightforward overhead lighting, but there's this interesting background which provides visual interest. And the technique I used is called cross-hatching. Cross-hatching, again, is a rendering technique. It means the use of small crisscross lines to create gradients and soft lighting effects. Here's the same character, only now she's lit from the side as before, but in a very simple, high contrast way. This creates a very pleasing graphic look. And notice that I've handled the background in the same way. Here's the same character, once again strongly backlit, and I used a really cool and dramatic rendering technique to get that background. I spattered white ink using the toothbrush. Here's the character once again bottom lit, looking a little sinister and creepy. The rendering technique I used here is called pointillism. Pointillism involves making lots of little dots on paper with pen. It takes a lot of time, but the effect is quite beautiful. Here's the character rendered with a technique called ink wash. Ink wash means using a brush and creating light with layers of thinned out watery black ink. Very lovely. And finally, here's the character rendered using charcoal sticks. When you use charcoal on paper, you can smooth and blend with your fingertip to create really nice gradients and shadows. Rendering is one of the more creative parts of drawing comics. The only limit to your rendering techniques is your imagination. Take a look at this. This is a page from a graphic novel I did. It's ink on paper, and the art is 10 inches wide and 15 inches tall, standard original comics art size. It's an image of two guys walking and talking on a beach. Pretty simple, not very exciting. So, I decided to have some fun with this image by spicing up the rendering. I really pulled out the stops and just let myself have fun. For the clouds in the sky, I did cross-hatching and spattered white ink over it to make it fade out more. And I used white ink with pen to indicate the tops of some of the clouds, as you can see here. For the beach, I used pointillism to help with the sand. Once again, this is time-consuming, but it makes pretty convincing beach sand. For the two characters, I just used pretty simple and straightforward line work. I wanted them to be really clear, but notice that the light source is above. I put shadows in to indicate that they are top-lit. And this is where it gets weird. For the sky, I put in these noodly, wiggly lines. Why? I don't know. For some reason, I just wanted the sky to have an energy and life of its own. So I had this idea and went with it. So as you can see, you can pack a page with all kinds of rendering techniques to create pleasing and sometimes weird effects. You just have to be bold. Probably the best way for me to convey to you how I approach rendering is just to let you watch me doing it. So I'm going to spend a little time drawing and rendering a picture with a whole bunch of different surfaces and textures. Follow along if you want, or just watch. I hope you enjoy this.
Okay, so for this rendering exercise, I'm going to be drawing a very lovely park scene, and I've kind of cheated here. I've already done a really basic sketch, and when I was doing this sketch, I was looking at a photograph of a really lovely bridge in Central Park in New York City. So I'm just going to start drawing in all the basic forms. As you can see, I'm doing this with a computer again, just because it speeds things up for these demonstrations. This is a nice, like, shrub or bush that I wanted to put here. I was looking at a photo of this bridge in Central Park, and but I didn't just copy it. I was just using it for ideas and reference. Very important when you're a comics artist to use reference, to look at photographs of buildings, places, people, cars, airplanes, animals, everything. Because you want the things that you're drawing to look real and not just made up. Now I'm putting in the outline of this big old tree in the foreground. This is the trunk leaning over. Now I'm going to put this other tree behind it. And you may be able to tell that I'm sort of varying my line weight. It's kind of getting thicker and thinner in a really subtle way. And that's a good thing to do when you're drawing organic living things. It makes them more vibrant and alive. Right now I'm just putting the outline of the kind of crown of leaves at the top of this tree. Now some more shrubbery, kind of behind the tree, but in front of the bridge. Just doing the outline of these masses of foliage, making this kind of wiggly, poofy little line. It's going all around like that. More bushes down low at the base of the trees. Now down here, the base of the water, this is going to be a lake or a pond going sort of under the bridge. This is a big rock. Central Park in New York City is full of lots of exposed granite. That you can walk on and kids can play on. I'm going to add some branches underneath this bush or a bit of shrubbery. And I'm going to start to work on the hillside, the land over here, just indicating plant life with these little bunches of wiggly lines. Some more shrubbery here. As you can see, I'm kind of jumping all over the drawing. I'm not sticking to any one place, and I'm not getting too hung up on the details of anything this early in the drawing. That's a mistake that some beginning artists make. They become obsessed over getting little things right before they move on. I prefer to treat the entire drawing as sort of a unit, okay? And I'm working on the whole thing at once. The whole thing is kind of taking shape at the same time. And I go back in later and finish adding details and things. So these are just more rocks on the side of this lake or body of water. Going to indicate some grass, some foliage here at the base of this tree. Now I'm going to start to put in some major forms of the, actually let me do this first. Got this little bit of land sort of jutting out, so squiggly lines to indicate foliage. And these are lily pads. And I'm just putting this little kind of very simple lily pad icon or symbol, and I'm repeating it. And this helps to reinforce the idea that we're looking at water, a pond. Put some over here. Not too many, just a few. Alright, so it's starting to take shape. Now I'm going to do some of the major forms in the further background. I'm going to make my pen a little thinner so that my line is a bit lighter in the far background. I'll talk about this more in the lesson devoted to inking, but in general, when you're drawing things that are further away, you want the outlines to be thinner and lighter. It helps to create the illusion of distance. And you want the outlines of things that are close to you in the foreground to be thicker and heavier. Now, I'm keeping my thin line because I'm now drawing the landforms that are on the other side of the bridge. There's a hill. A few hills kind of overlapping each other, and more indication of woods. Now for these buildings, I'm going to use my ruler tool. If I were doing this on paper, I'd be using an actual ruler to create these nice straight lines. You'll see in a minute that I'm just making lines that I can then go over with my pen tool, and they'll come out nice and straight. When I'm doing these things, these buildings, I'm thinking about perspective, of course. These buildings are more or less in two-point perspective. All right, switching back to the pen tool. And now, as you can see, I can just go over these ruled lines pretty quickly. And I get these nice straight lines. Okay. And all right, so before I start doing the moving into details, I just want to draw in the basic shapes of these clouds. And I'm going to show you a pretty straightforward, foolproof way to do convincing clouds. You give them these kind of rounded, poofy tops, but this kind of flattened underside. Just like that. If you actually look at clouds, sometimes you'll notice this. They've got the rounded, poofy tops and the sort of flat bottoms. It's just a quick and easy way to indicate clouds. All right. Now I can get rid of my underlying sketch, and there we have kind of the basic forms in place. Now I'm going to start doing some details. I think I'll start with the bridge. Now we know that the bridge is a man-made object, and I've looked at enough bridges in Central Park to know that they have this kind of interesting stonework sometimes. So I'm going to just continue this pattern all the way across this arch. Drawing things like this is I find it to be a supremely relaxing thing to do. It focuses my mind, calms me down, puts me in the zone, puts me at my ease. It's really nothing I'd rather be doing. I remember when I was a kid, when I was about 6 years old, one day I asked my teacher at school to draw me a tornado, because I was really obsessed with tornadoes. And I remember she drew this amazing little picture of one. And I can still see it to this day. And I think that was sort of the day that I started to really draw seriously, because I had the impression that she was really creating something, not just putting marks on paper, but it was like she was actually creating a tornado. And sometimes when you are drawing, it really feels like you're making something real. Now for the rest of the bridge, I'm just going to put these little areas of these kind of rounded rectangles to kind of indicate stonework, masonry. Don't have to put them everywhere. That would take a long time. If you just put little areas, the viewer will fill in the blanks. They sort of look at it and they understand immediately, oh, it's a stonework bridge. See how that looks. Pretty good. A few more over here. Now, I'm thinking about the lighting, and this is a daytime scene, so the light is coming, it's pretty much standard overhead lighting. Let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my magic wand tool to select that area. I'm going to fill it in with black. And now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to start using cross-hatching. Remember our friend cross-hatching from the sphere exercise? I'm going to use cross-hatching to create a light transition or gradient. Switching over to white ink to help make this even smoother and more lovely. Back to black ink. Okay. Looking pretty good. Stones over here. Okay. Now I'm going to start to work on this rock a little bit. And remember, this is the up plane, meaning that's the plane that is facing upward. And I'm going to leave that up plane light, because I want to help indicate that the light is striking it. And so I'm just going to put these kind of straight lines on the side plane of this piece of granite. And by making them pretty straight, I help to reinforce that this is a rock with sort of with planes. I'll do the same thing with these ones over here. Alright, let's start to add a little life to this tree. There's all kinds of different ways that you can render wood. Here's a quick and easy one that I like. I'm just putting these kind of curving lines on the down plane of the trunk of the tree. Put a few here. Put some on this tree trunk in the background. Now, let's do a little work on this bit of foliage. You can see what I'm doing here is I'm just scribbling. I'm literally just scribbling. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. Just making this chaotic, scribbly, noodly line work. On the underside of this bush. When people look at that, they see foliage. It scans as bunches of leaves. But it's a rendering technique, it's just scribbling. And I think for the grass back here, I want to create the impression of a grassy field, so I'm just going to put some areas of tufts of grass. You don't want to put too many. If you just put some, the viewer will see a field of grass. And I think for this this little lake shore, I want to indicate like soil. So I'm just putting these lines like that, little ticks, little circles to indicate pebbles and dirt. Not too many, just put them in little bunches and groups. I'm just having fun. Now I'm going to work on this bit of shrubbery over here. I'm going to start by, I used my magic wand tool to quickly darken in this area. I'm going to use white ink underneath to indicate branches. Finish off a few more details of shrubbery over here. Now for the buildings, neaten that up a little. I'm just going to put a few windows, not too many. Sort of the same idea as doing just a few bricks on the brickwork. If you put just a few, the viewer will fill in the rest themselves with their imagination. Chimney maybe. Okay, got a few more minutes. Gonna fill in some of the blanks on these woods back here. Do the same thing I did before, using white ink to indicate tree trunks. And I'm going to use the scribble technique to indicate the actual foliage. Very relaxing, this part of the job. There's really no end to the, kinds of techniques you can invent for indicating different surfaces. I kind of just started doing foliage like this one day, and I saw that it looked pretty good, and so I sort of stuck with it. Putting a few more little masses of scribble. And I'm creating the effect that this is a bunch of trees lit from above. Okay, let's carry this on a little bit back here. And maybe I'll add just a few of these spiky little water icons. To help indicate that this is a body of water. And I can even put some lines like this around the rocks to sort of indicate ripples. Do the same thing over here. Making them nice and light. Okay, it's looking pretty good. So we're about out of time with this, but I hope this has been helpful. You know, we used cross-hatching, which is a rendering technique we were already sort of familiar with, and we used the scribble technique to help indicate foliage, and for, you know, these little spiky tufts of grass to help indicate grassland, and these little bunches of stone, just these little circles, ovals, to help indicate the presence of brickwork or stonework. And this interesting technique with these curving lines to help indicate wood. And again, I want to point out that the things in the far background, the buildings and the trees back here, they have a lighter outline, clouds too, because in general, when things are receding and in the distance, you're going to draw them with a lighter touch. That helps to create the illusion of depth and distance.
So that's your lightning tour of light and shadow and rendering. The use of light and shadow is one of the comics artist's main tools for creating the illusion of shape and form, and for creating emotion and mood. And the comics artist uses a bunch of different rendering techniques to create the sense of different surfaces and textures. I know it was a lot of information, and I sure appreciate your following along. For our next lesson, we're going to be talking about something really important, the human face. I can't wait to be with you all again. Till then, keep on practicing and be well. Bye-bye for now.